So Peter, as our senior business correspondent, did Canada just have a good day?
Yeah, look, I mean, everything's relative, of course, but given the chaos and the disorder and the threats and the tariffs that are already in place and all of the unknowns and all the uncertainty that were leading up to this day where there was a very big threat on the table, it is hard to imagine a scenario that could have unfolded much better for Canada. There are still, as we've heard through the newscast, a lot of threats. There are still existing tariffs. There are still problems on the road ahead. But I think the fact that we dodged as much of the bullet as we did has to be seen as good news. And I think if you listened closely right around 4:30 or so, when we sort of started to figure out what was up here, I think you might have caught the wind of a heaving sigh of relief from boardrooms of CEOs, of policymakers, of union leaders, of just about everybody across the country.
What about Parliament Hill, though? So, Catherine, that's where you always have us covered. And I'm curious what this moment tells you politically.
Well, Adrienne, the tone is definitely very sober. It seemed coming into this that today might be this big inflection point in the election, pushing Canada deeper into economic misery. And certainly with the auto tariffs coming into effect, this is still bad. But the political impact of this day, it is perhaps a bit murkier now. A couple of things to reflect on. One, the likely impact on the global economy, the markets, the knock-on effects for Canada. These reciprocal tariffs could still impact the Canadian economy in that way. Mark Carney's assessment is that this will fundamentally change the international trading system. Two, Donald Trump took aim at Canada's dairy sector. All the major political parties want to protect supply management for dairy and poultry, but particularly with a trade agreement review likely to come up, perhaps sooner than later, it is a reminder that this is a sore point that Trump may focus on.
And this is only today, right? We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow or in the days to come. Peter, if we take your presumption that Canada had a good day, what about the rest of the world? Can you set the table for us?
This is going to be catastrophic for many countries around the world. This is, to steal Mark Carney's line via Catherine Cullen, this is a reordering of the global trade system that we've spent 70 years building up, that companies have spent billions of dollars trying to manage and leverage and use to their advantage, is coming undone underfoot. This is going to happen incredibly fast. It's going to hit some countries and some companies harder than others, but it's going to hit all of them and thus all of us in a way that undoing all of this, if that is the true desire of this administration, this is going to be years of undoing. It's going to be billions of dollars in reshoring and reshaping and sort of manufacturing how we trade with one another all around the globe. And that's a very different thing than saying United States alone wants to put up some trade barriers and change the way they import and export and their particular trade relationships. This changes how Europe does business with Asia, how Asia does business with North America, how the entire countries of the world will come together, and all of the trade deals that have been built on the assumption that we're working towards bringing tariffs down, most of them are now thrown into question as well.
Catherine, I mean, this would have been a weird enough day at any time, but being in the middle of a federal election campaign, I'm curious what you're hearing from the campaigns themselves, and if you have any sense of how this is likely to play out on the trail.
Yeah, well, Adrienne and Peter just laid out what a roller coaster of a day it's been, and there really is still a scramble to process what this means. The Liberals, of course, are still the government. Mark Carney said they will be discussing countermeasures to deal with the bigger picture. It would be to Pierre Poilievre's political advantage if Canadians were less concerned about Trump after today. He would rather be talking about affordability, cost of living, but concerns about global markets tend to play more to Mark Carney's strengths and his background in finance, monetary policy. And so you saw today Poilievre trying to blunt some of that, arguing that for Carney, a resume is not a plan. In fact, Poilievre laid out his own plan today, obviously trying to push back against some of that incumbency advantage that Carney seems to be enjoying. Poilievre explaining the measures he would take to try to help protect workers in the face of tariffs, how he would attempt to renegotiate Canada's trade relationship with the United States. Carney has already touched on a lot of that ground, laid out his own vision. It was interesting also to see at the end of the day, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, also a conservative, putting out a statement suggesting that the worst of this tariff dispute is behind us, which again would benefit Pierre Poilievre politically. It's striking to make a prediction about Donald Trump's behavior. The worst is over. We know that can be a risky proposition, Adrienne.
Peter, as we were all looking at that event in the Rose Garden, it's not lost to me that there were people there who are counting on Donald Trump making their lives better, right? In a way, that's almost why they were invited. And they're counting on him making their lives better in a matter of months. And I'm wondering how realistic that is for them.
Look, there are two answers to that. One is we can see it through markets, that investors simply didn't believe that Donald Trump was going to make good on this threat. They thought it was rhetoric, the way he'd sort of threatened to tear up NAFTA or make Mexico build for the wall. They thought this was just a negotiating tactic. And as the threat turned into tariff and if tariffs began to bite and take hold, investors said, well, hold on a second, we got to sell off. This doesn't make any sense because it's bad for business. It's bad for consumers. It's bad for growth. It's bad for inflation. And if a company doesn't pass on the cost of this tariff, then they eat that cost. That's bad for their margins. It's bad for earnings. It's bad for stock markets. If they pass that cost along to consumers, that's bad for disposable income. It's bad for inflation. It's bad for growth. That too is bad for stock markets. So there's that side of the answer. But then you get all these people that voted for Donald Trump because they were so upset about inflation. They wanted to just see a fix. And that was the enthusiasm we saw in markets. In the early days after Trump was elected, they thought he's going to cut regulations, he's going to cut taxes, he's going to boost the economy. Great days are ahead. These are not going to lead to great days ahead, even if they somehow stick to their guns here and manage a way to try to sort of, reshore more manufacturing back to the United States. It's taking billions of dollars and years upon years to get that done. That's not going to address the cost of eggs or the cost of groceries, the cost of whatever it is people are struggling with in the United States. And that is beginning to become clear. And as those two forces, markets falling, consumers getting upset, that's going to put yet more pressure on Donald Trump to, instead of stick to his guns and get the bigger reordering done, he's going to go back to handing out exemptions and carve-outs and workarounds and negotiation tactic. So it's really hard to square those two things and those two responses with what we've been seeing in terms of policy from the White House.
So those are Americans. It's not lost to me that there are Canadians right now who are exhausted. They are confused. They're wondering what sort of business moves that they can make. So for them, what's your sense to each of you of the bottom line in terms of what they need to be looking for next? Catherine, we'll start with you and then with Peter.
Yeah, I think there are quite a few things to watch here. Now that the rest of the world is about to feel some more of what Canada has been feeling, might we work differently with our allies? What do Canadian countermeasures look like? How do Canadians react to this news in the midst of an election? And how does Donald Trump's recent somewhat calmer tone towards Canada, does it last? Does it stick?
Okay, Peter, briefly to you.
Look, I think the most important thing to watch for next is how what the federal government does in terms of retaliation. Remember, if they impose counter tariffs, all that means is that Canadians, you and I and everybody watching this, is going to have to pay more for stuff that's coming in from the United States. Our economy is already in a tough spot. Canadians are already squeezed in terms of cost of living. That's only going to add to that. And I'll be really interested to see how they manage both the message and the actual implementation of policy around this response, especially given that, no, it wasn't a complete victory today, but it was better than a lot of people thought it was going to be going in.
All right, Peter, Catherine, thank you.
Thank you.